This is Global Order. I am Hindol Sen Gupta. With me is Dr. Rahul Sen. Dr. Sen teaches at the Auckland University of Technology in the Department of Economics and Finance. He's a noted trade expert in New Zealand. And of course, one of the things he really understands is the FTA between New Zealand and India. Now, there's been a lot of conversation about many FTAs that India has signed, but the FTA with New Zealand has been less remarked upon. Notwithstanding, there was quite a furore about it back in New Zealand. To explain all that and what's the future of trade between these two countries, here is Dr. Rahul Sen. Dr. Sen, welcome.
Thank you very much, Hindol. Glad to be back.
Let me begin, Rahul, by asking you how important do you think is this FTA, free trade agreement between India and New Zealand, especially from a New Zealand point of view?
If anyone has been sort of following New Zealand's trade in the past couple of decades, for example, you will see that they have been heavily relying on a couple of major trading partners, and mainly China and Australia in the recent past. And in terms of looking at New Zealand's economic future, and the fact that, with all these global uncertainties, with the changing geopolitics, you need to really diversify your trading partners. You really cannot, you need to look at other options. And more importantly, from a small open economies perspective like New Zealand, you really need to be a lot more deeply connected with where the majority of the economic growth is coming from. And as we all know, after China, the big epicenter of economic growth right now is in India. And clearly, from New Zealand's perspective, over the past couple of years, there was a clear recognition that they needed to build up this economic relationship. The momentum sort of built up more after COVID, and with these increasing uncertainties involving the US, where I think both countries also saw an opportunity to come together to mitigate some of these risks, economic risks that might come up in the future. And both countries took upon that opportunity in a fairly short space of time, I would say, to actually get this trade agreement through. But coming back to the key question, that why is this important for New Zealand? As I said, especially when we are looking at the current situation that is evolving in terms of the disruptions that we are witnessing. I think it is really important for New Zealand to have a stable democratic country as one of the key trading partners that it can rely on in the near future. And I think from that perspective, it will be really good to build up this relationship for them with India through the FTA. And eventually, we should see India coming up from, say, currently the 12th largest trading partner to hopefully at least among the top 10 with this FTA.
This has been described, Rahul, as one of the most important trade agreements New Zealand has signed in the recent past. Now, why do you think that's true? And what are the key things that New Zealand hopes to gain from this FTA?
I mean, if you, as I mentioned to you in the past couple of years, actually, it has always been seen that with India, India's rising economic importance, it was really important for New Zealand to make sure that they end up having the market access to this rapidly growing economy. And I think with the FTA that was signed of India with Australia in 2023, I think probably also sent the clear signal to New Zealand that they will face more trade diversion if they were not to be getting really serious about building up this economic relationship urgently with India. And in that sense, one of the key things for New Zealand particularly was that because, as you know, New Zealand's exports is mainly agricultural products. So for them, especially in a growing market like India, where consumers are becoming very quality conscious, demanding, quality stuff. Uh, New Zealand saw this as an opportunity to actually build on this FTA in terms of also focusing on the fact that they have the capability to not just sell quality agricultural products in India, but also partner with India to improve India's agricultural productivity. And I think this part of what has been achieved in the agreement, at least as part of the key outcomes that we know, because the whole agreement, of course, is not revealed yet. But even from this point of view, this is something which is going to open a lot of opportunities for New Zealand businesses, which is kind of a new frontier for them, because New Zealand has generally been more of what you can say a transactional kind of had a transactional kind of an approach in most of its FTAs in terms of focusing mainly on goods market access. But why this is going to be very different and probably a game changer for New Zealand, I would say, is because this FTA is not just about the buy and sell of your goods or services. This is about people mobility. This is about investment cooperation. This is about economic cooperation and also strategic cooperation. So, therefore, in many ways, although in New Zealand we always call it an FTA because that's usually what most trade agreements have been called here. But I would say, given my research around trade agreements for Southeast Asia and broader region, the area that has been covered in this agreement amounts to a comprehensive strategic economic partnership. And I think that's what is really different in terms of what has been achieved by the two countries in this deal.
Talk to me a little bit about which New Zealand sectors, I know you mentioned agriculture, but
Mm,
which
mm,
sectors stand to gain the most, Rahul, from this agreement, which, as you
mm,
were saying, is in fact broader in scope and ambition than a
mm,
traditional FTA? And how
mm,
quickly do you think exporters in New Zealand would feel those gains? And I would also ask you about India.
mm,
What would India gain from your point of
mm.
view, and how quickly would those gains accrue, in your opinion?
So let's first pick up the key sectors from New Zealand's point of view. So, if this agreement comes into force, which is expected hopefully by the end of this year or early next year, what we are likely to see is, from New Zealand's perspective, immediately forestry, wool, sheep meat, hides and skin. These are the kind of exports which will go tariff free from their existing, whatever tariffs they were attracting. So clearly, this is the immediate opportunity so far as New Zealand exporters are concerned. And forestry has always been a very big part of New Zealand's current exports to India. And this is, of course, immediately entry into force. And the idea is that over a period of about 5 to 10 years, nearly 95% of New Zealand exports essentially will become tariff free into India. But some of the salient features in terms of the big gains, I would say, for New Zealand is the seasonal window for the tariff rated quotas that they have got now to sell apple, kiwi fruit into New Zealand, into India. So there's going to be a tariff rated quota on the basis of which they are going to be having a fixed amount of apples and kiwi fruit during a seasonal window of around April to September, October, roughly, within which they can utilize that quota at almost reduced at the incrementally reduced tariff rates over the next couple of years. And of course, the quotas are also going to be incrementally increase. So I think from that point of view, that's a big win for the kiwi fruit and apple growers here. And then we have Manuka honey, which is also going to be a big part of the tariff rated quotas. In fact, I think that's going to be really one of the big game changers here because I think the current volume is around 14 metric tons of exports to India. And that, according to the tariff rated quotas, is going to go up to 200 metric tons upon entry into force. Current tariff is about 66%. So upon entry into force, there will be a 10% tariff cut. And then over 5 years, that's going to be cut down by about 75%. Similarly, for New Zealand wine, alcoholic beverages, seafood, all those sectors are going to see incrementally tariffs being phased out over the next 5 to 7 years. Um, the last and the most interesting part of this agreement, which of course is from New Zealand's perspective quite important, is that there have been some very selected dairy ingredients and as well as milk albumins, which are also now being granted a reduced tariff and better market access. In some cases, these high quality dairy ingredients being directly imported into India only for the purpose of re-exports, which means we have a value chain connection in dairy now from New Zealand farmers with the Indian dairy farmers. And I think, again, to me, this will be a game changer for New Zealand because this connects them with the growing dairy value chain. So this is about the goods. And then we are coming to the other areas, which, of course, from India's point of view, what is India going to gain from this? So, again, in terms of the current exports of India, the big gains are going to be in areas where they faced around 5 to 10% tariffs, which is going to go tariff free upon entry into force, because from India, 100% of all exports to New Zealand will basically become tariff free. And some of these products are definitely very important for Indian exporters, particularly that of textiles, that of leather, pharmaceuticals, and so on. So those will be definitely some sectors where we will see some expansion from New Zealand, from Indian exports. But apart from that, the other big gain, I think, from India's perspective is two. One is the agricultural productivity partnerships that are supposed to be resulting in return for, of course, the preferential market access and the tariff rated quotas that we just heard about. And on top of that, the um, selected professional areas where India has got opportunities for talent flows, essentially through the mobility visas that will be granted by New Zealand in very specific occupations. So from India's perspective, the gains are actually around all the three. So goods, investment flows, as well as people mobility.
The deal already faced a considerable backlash within New Zealand, which actually surprised many in India. Talk to me about why there was such a backlash.
Uh, I think this basically what you might have heard essentially is, certain sections of the political community being skeptical about the fact that maybe New Zealand gave away too much because they didn't see dairy not being included. And the other fact being that they thought that these, mobility partnership that has been created through this special visas for some of these categories that is going to lead to a spur in immigration, and particularly from the point of view of what has been happening in the rest of the world with respect to the backlash, particularly with unskilled labor immigration. I think the real concern still remains that any kind of trade agreements should not lead to unskilled immigration, because then that will directly sort of, impact some existing jobs in the market. So that's kind of the crux because of which there was that skepticism, and I think there's still that continuing skepticism in certain pockets, and that's primarily because the details of the text aren't yet revealed. So we do not. So what people are kind of speculating is essentially from the key outcomes that have been revealed. But to be very, very clear, in terms of the key outcomes, what we have seen is that it is very clearly specified that the visas that will be provided for these skilled professionals from India, which is largely doctors, engineers, teachers, etc., around, I think, up to a maximum limit of 5,000 per year or so, that is going to be non-renewable. And it's only going to be for a period of 3 years. So I think from New Zealand's point of view, they made it very clear, at least from the negotiators' point of view, that the idea is that this is to alleviate the skill shortages that exist in New Zealand, and in no way connected with encouraging immigration in this country. And the other thing I think that is often, especially from a trade economist point of view, and you would have heard this debate, a lot more times earlier in the US, that trade is taking away our jobs, and that is why we need to close certain pockets of immigration and so on. So this is basically a classic argument where you are completely ignoring the idea of skill bias technological change, which essentially comes with trade, right? We all know that when we have trade between two countries, you always have two groups, one of which is likely to be gaining, the other which is likely to be, not so much, and therefore has to be protected by the government in some level or the other. So the skill bias technological change problem, I think, is kind of the root uh, in terms of what we are witnessing as an immigration backlash against trade more generally in a lot of developed countries. And I think this is is the what we saw to some extent in New Zealand as well. But what I believe is that after all those initial skepticisms and the whole idea that whether this is a deal good enough to be supported and all that, given the election season that we have coming up in New Zealand, from what I have seen so far, Hindol, is that there is a very broader consensus that very clearly is emerging that the future of New Zealand's economy has to be where the growth epicenters are going to be in the next few years. And very clearly, the reality of the data that is emerging is telling that this FTA is not just going to be a short-term market access opportunity for New Zealand farmers. This is a partnership opportunity. This is the opportunity for New Zealand investors to actually invest in the long-term Vision 2447 for India, particularly in the area of agribusiness and also in broader manufacturing. And in some ways, actually partner for the longer term. And I think that reality is pretty much there among most politicians. And if I may also add, because I was at an event just the other day on the New Zealand India FTA, and we had actually the current immigration minister who was there, and he acknowledged very, very clearly that it is very the data supports it, and they also know that the emerging the diaspora, the Indian diaspora that exists here, which is currently about 6% of the total population, is one of the most hardworking community in this country, the most law-abiding citizens in this country, who have contributed very significantly to the New Zealand economy, to the New Zealand businesses over all these years. So I think that makes it very clear that the general politics in New Zealand, come election season, obviously, there will be statements like these which probably will ignore some of the economic realities. But the fact is, I think there is a broad-based consensus that whosoever comes to power, this FTA will be coming through, and this will likely to be enforced. To me, the bigger question is how quickly, and as you mentioned, how quickly the gains will be coming through, how quickly New Zealand businesses will be able to actually jump onto this opportunity.
Talk a little bit about the contentious dairy sector, Rahul. The way you described it,
Hmm.
some parts of the dairy sector have been opened, which is
Hmm.
quite an unprecedented thing from India's point of view, because this is a very
Hmm.
tightly protected sector because of various reasons. And
Hmm.
yet, perhaps that is not how it is seen by many quarters in New Zealand, who obviously seek even bigger, sort of, a bigger and more expansive opening.
Hmm.
Talk to me a little bit about difference of perspective about the dairy sector opening in India to New Zealand businesses, and your assessment of what has been done and whether that is entirely understood or not.
Okay. I mean, there is, everyone knows that for New Zealand, the biggest export earner has always been the dairy sector. So therefore, there's no surprises that whenever New Zealand has negotiated any trade agreement, the dairy sector has been always at the forefront. And this has been no different compared to the past FTAs that they have entered into with the UK or with the EU, or with China or with anyone else. So I think it was very clear when this FTA negotiations sort of began once again, because if you recall that way back in 2011 when the negotiations had stalled, when they had initially began, one of the key issues was that was that of dairy, and it was very clear from Indian government's perspective that dairy is off the table and there won't be any negotiations on this. So to me, the real win-win here, and I would kind of call this as a very pragmatic way of thinking, is that if you know given that New Zealand's dairy sector is of a very high quality, and particularly dairy products, they are of a very high quality. So this FTA, particularly in terms of these dairy ingredients that have been now allowed market access, gives opportunity for Indian dairy farmers to utilize these dairy ingredients to improve the quality of dairy products, not just sold in India, but exported from India. So to me, this is an unbelievable kind of a partnership, if you would think of, in terms of looking at India's perspective, because as you rightly said, clearly there is a hugely sensitive sector, and as we see across India's FTAs, dairy sector, particularly dairy products, definitely have always been in the sensitive list, and I think it's made very clear that it will be for the near future. But as far as I understand, there are two things here that has happened for New Zealand. First, of course, is this window of opportunity for the high quality dairy ingredient exporters to sell to India for further exports purposes, which is the value chain connection. The second is the clause that New Zealand has put in there that if ever in the near future there is any market access offered by India in dairy products to any single country by MFN, automatically New Zealand should be getting that market access. So to me, that is not something small, because we all know that India is, of course, right now a global dairy giant. It is exporting globally. And clearly, once you have a sector which becomes competitive over time, from the trade perspective, you do see that maybe the sensitivities related with that gradually can dissipate. Of course, this is something which is clearly, hypothetical. I'm not saying that that's going to happen. But even the very fact that New Zealand is accounted for the fact that if in the near future there is any kind of market access and then New Zealand has the right to get that equal access, to me I think that is something that's something very important. But that aside, I think this very fact that, New Zealand dairy has some opportunity here to actually connect with the value chain of dairy farmers, I think is big opportunity, because at least to me this will give an opportunity for New Zealand businesses who are engaged in dairy, particularly in dairy ingredients, to actually even go and see in India that, how big the dairy industry is, what impact it can make, and more importantly, how both can partner to actually make it not just bigger in volumes, but also in quality. And I think this quality aspect is something which is often undermined in trade agreements, because when we talk about trade agreements, it's more just about we are exporting this and in return we are allowing you to import that. But what about the quality of the product? And I think this is where the New Zealand India FTA is unique, because this is where it is focusing on improving the quality of agricultural produce in India, not just dairy, but even the idea is to set up those centers of excellence with partnership with New Zealand. So, apple, kiwi fruit, even in honey, apiculture. So you're going to see a lot of these agricultural partnership opportunities, opening up for the Indian agriculture sector, which I think is really very critical looking at the future of India's economic growth.
Very positive note. We will have to leave it there. Dr. Rahul Sen, thanks very much for talking to me on Global Order about the India New Zealand FTA. We hear about many other bigger FTAs, so to speak, in scale. But as Dr. Sen has explained, there are some really unique attributes to the India New Zealand FTA, especially its focus on certain agrarian products, especially important among them is dairy. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and pleasure.